Hi everyone. Now we are going to discuss about famous literary movements in English literature. Cavalier poet, 17th century English royalist poets, writing primarily about country love, called Sons of Ben, after Ben Jonson. Notable authors Richard Lovelace, William Davenant. Metaphysical poet, 17th century English movement using extended conceit, often, though not always, about religion. Notable authors John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell. The Augustines, 18th century literary movement based chiefly on classical ideals, satire, and skepticism. Notable authors Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift. Romanticism, 19th century, 1800 to 1860, movement emphasizing emotion and imagination rather than logic and scientific thought. Response to enlightenment. Famous authors Mary Shelley, Victor Hugo, Lord Byron, Camilo Castillo, Branko Adam, Mickiewicz. Dark Romanticism, 19th century American movement in reaction to transcendentalism, finds man inherently sinful and self-destructive and nature a dark, mysterious force. Famous authors Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Edwin Arlington Robinson. American Romanticism, distinct from European Romanticism, the American form emerged somewhat later, was based more in fiction than in poetry, and incorporated, sometimes almost suffocating, awareness of history, particularly the dark aspect of American history. Famous authors Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ambrose Bierce. Gothic novel, fiction which romantic ideals are combined with an interest in the supernatural and in violence. Famous authors Anne Radcliffe, Bram Stoker, Harper Lee, Edgar Allan Poe. Lake poets, a group of romantic poets from the English Lake District who wrote about nature and sublime. Famous authors William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Robert Southey. Pre-Raphaelitism, 19th century, primarily English movement based ostensibly on undoing innovations by the painter Raphael. Many were both painters and poets. Famous authors Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Christina Rossetti. Transcendentalism, 19th century American movement, poetry and philosophy concerned with self-reliance, independence from modern technology. Famous authors Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. Realism, late 19th century movement based on a simplification of style and image and an interest in poverty and everything concerns. Famous authors Gustave Flaubert, William Dean Howells, Stendhal, Honoré de Balzac, Leo Tolstoy, and Fyodor. Naturalism, late 19th century, proponents of this movement believe heredity and environment control people. Emile Zola, Stephen Crane, Guy de Maupassant, Theodore Dreiser. Socialist realism. Socialist realism is a subset of realistic art which focuses on communist values and realistic depiction. It developed in Soviet Union and was imposed as state policy by Joseph Stalin in 1934. Though authors in other socialist countries and members of the Communist Party in non-socialist countries also partook in the movement. Maxim Gorky, Nikolai Ostrovsky, Mikhail Sholokhov, Luxen, Takichi Kobayashi, Mike Gold. Magical realism. Literary movement in which magical elements appear in otherwise realistic circumstances, most often associated with the Latin American theory boom of 20th century. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Octavia Paz, Gunther Grass, Julio Cortázar, Sadiq Hedayat, Malay Roy Chaudhary. Symbolism. Principally French movement of the fin de siècle. Symbolism is codified by the Symbolist Manifesto in 1886 and focused on the structure of thought rather than poetic form or image. Influential for English language poets from Edgar Allan Poe to James Murray. The famous authors are Stéphane Mallarmé, Arthur Rimbaud, Paul Valéry. Futurism. Codified in 1909 by the Manifesto of Futurism. Futurism avoids being intellectual and using fixed syntax or style, makes use of irony and analogy, and is to be written intuitively or from inspiration. Famous authors: Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, Mina Loy, Jaroslav Seifert. Stream of consciousness. Early 20th century fiction consisting of literary representation of quotidian thought without authorial presence. Famous authors: Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. Modernism. Variegated movement of the early 20th century encompassing primitivism, formal innovation or reaction to science and technology. Famous authors: Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, H.T. James Joyce, Gertrude Stein, Fernando Pessoa, Kent Hampson. Expressionism. Part of the large expressionist movement, literary and theoretical expressionism is an avant-garde movement originated in Germany, which rejects realism in order to depict emotions and subjective thoughts. Famous authors: Franz Kafka, Alfred Doblin, Gottfried Benn, Heinrich Mann, Oskar Kokoschka. Imagism. Poetry based on description rather than theme, and on the motto, the natural object is always the adequate symbol. Famous authors: Ezra Pound, H.D. Richard Aldington. First World War poets. British poets who documented both the idealism and the horrors of war and the period in which it took place. Famous authors: Seyfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke, Wilfred Owen. The Lost Generation. The term Lost Generation is traditionally attributed to Gertrude Stein and was then popularized by Ernest Hemingway. In the epigraph to his novel The Sun Also Rises and his memoir A Movable Feast, it refers to a group of American literary notables who lives in Paris and other part of Europe from the time period which saw the end of World War I to the beginning of the Great Depression. Famous writers: F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Ezra Pound, Waldo Pierce, John Dos Passos. Harlem Renaissance. African American poets novelists, and thinkers, often employing elements of blues and folklore. Based in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City in the 1920s. Famous writers Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston. Surrealism. Originally a French movement influenced by surrealist painting that uses surprising images and transition to play off of formal expectations and depict the unconscious rather than conscious mind. Famous authors Jean Cocteau, Jose Maria Hinojosa, Lasarte, André Breton, Sadiq Hidayat, Mario Cesarini. Postmodernism. Post-war movement skeptical of absolutes and embracing diversity, irony and wordplay. Absurdism. The Absurdism movement is derived from absurdist philosophy, which argues that life is inherently purposeless and questions truth and value. As such, absurdist literature and literature of absurd often include dark humor, satire, and incongruity. Famous writers Jean-Paul Sartre, Samuel Beckett, Albert Camus, Gamo Xinjiang. Black Mountain Poets. A self-identified group of poets originally based at Black Mountain College, who eschewed patterned form in favor of the rhythms and inflection of the human voice. Post-colonialism. A diverse, loosely connected movement of writers from former colonies of European countries whose work is frequently politically charged. Famous writers Jamaica Kincaid, V.S. Naipaul, Derek Walcott, Salman Rushdie, Giannia Braschi, Walt Soyinka, Chinua Achebe. New Formalism, a late 20th and early 21st century movement in American poetry advocating a return to traditional accental syllabic verse. Main authors are Molly Peacock, Bart Laythazer, Timothy Steele, Mary Jo Salter. That's all for today. Thank you.